Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my presentation on healthcare megatrends. My name is Al Reshka, and I'm the Chief Business Officer of Lifescience Dynamics. Today, we'll talk about 5 topics. The first is the healthcare landscape, followed by the rise of smart healthcare, digital empowering patients, disruption of the status quo, and a new frontier in healthcare. We'll begin with the landscape. So we are living longer lives, but not necessarily healthier lives. If you look at this heat map here of countries, this projects what the life expectancy will be in various nations in the year 2040. Over the next 20 years, the average life expectancy is projected to rise about 4.5 years. You'll note that in sub-Saharan Africa, we have the lowest life expectancy in the range of 65 to 70 years. The cause of mortality that's driving this shorter lifespan in these nations is infectious disease and lack of sanitary conditions. Now, if you look at the blue countries on the map, the darker the blue, the longer the lifespan is expected within each nation. And indeed, by 2040, Japan, Singapore, Spain, and Switzerland should have life expectancy that exceeds 85 years for both genders. So what's driving this change over the next couple of decades? On the graphic here on the left, I've used red arrows to indicate different mortality risks that are associated with the infectious disease. In the blue boxes are chronic diseases, and the blue arrows represent different types of tumors. Now we'll see as we transition from 2016 to 2040 that most of the infectious disease mortality causes decline. And this is because of vaccines and different anti-infectives that can be taken to treat the disease. One exception is lower respiratory infections, which stays flat over the 24-year period. And an example of this would be the coronavirus that we have currently raging today in our pandemic. We see that the chronic diseases rise up to replace some of the infectious diseases as a cause of mortality, as do some of these tumor types. What ends up happening is we have a set of risk factors that really in part point to lifestyle, which is in the forefront. So we have hypertension, we have obesity, diabetes, smoking, alcohol use, and a little bit of pollution as well as the top 6 causes. So if you think about the lifestyle changes that you can make around smoking, around diet, around exercise, there are things that you can do to control, to a certain extent, what your lifespan will be. The key here, though, is that by eliminating the infectious disease as a cause of mortality within these nations, patients go on to live longer lives. They get into chronic disease situations, which become expensive to care for. But ultimately, by not dying of a infectious disease earlier in life, they can live on and die from something else. So this then drives into the costs of healthcare. And the global healthcare spending is expected to grow between 2019 and 23 by a 5% compound annual growth rate. And it will equal 10.2% of gross domestic product. So if you look at 2023, as exemplified over here, it's expected the US will have healthcare costs of about $12,000 per patient, but it can go as cheap as $45 per year in Pakistan. If you look at OECD nations, at the low end for current 2019 costs, Mexico is at around $1,100 a year, and the United States is currently at a little over $11,000 per year. So there's about a 10-fold range across these nations. Now you might expect that because the United States has the highest expenditures for healthcare, that they might have the best healthcare quality. But that just isn't the case. When compared to the 10 developed countries, the 10 most comparable developed countries, the United States ranks last in overall healthcare performance. This includes spending that's about 50% higher than the next highest nation, which is Switzerland, and last place rankings in efficiency, equity, and healthy lives. So this first trend that we're seeing here is that the cost of healthcare are rising, but it's not because of over-inflationary price increases necessarily. is actually that by controlling infectious disease, we allow people to live longer lives, develop chronic diseases that create a burden in the system. So we'll switch to now the rise of smart healthcare. Smart healthcare is there to help try and drive down the costs of healthcare. So what we can see as we look at sort of older medicines such as aspirin, running through recombinant proteins, antibodies, and CAR Ts, is that we have increasing complexity of these therapies. But it's more than just increasing complexity. We're also having increasing specificity, either specificity in the way that the medicine acts, or specificity in the way that we identify patients that will benefit from taking these medicines. This can be exemplified looking at a number of different tumor types here. Within these tumor types, you can see that gene mutations contribute to susceptibility, about a 41% contribution in pancreatic cancer, going all the way up to 73% in melanoma. So what we find is that on average, about 75% of cancer drugs, 75% of patients do not respond to cancer medicines. So the idea is to switch away from a one-size-fits-all paradigm to precision medicine, identifying the right patients for the right medicines. And if you consider the very high costs of the various CAR Ts, ranging between $400,000 and over $800,000 per patient per treatment, you can understand clearly why one would not want to use a one-size-fits-all approach. You want to identify the right patient for the right therapy and drive down costs. So the way that you can transition from one-size-fits-all to precision medicine is through, in great part, diagnostic tools that can be identified, that can be used to identify the right patients for the right therapies. This includes next-generation DNA sequencing, which can get right down to the genetic level and really identify the right patients. And this is also aided by the leveraging of artificial intelligence, which allows us to do very complex analyses and also make decisions that have a less bias introduced into them. So if we look at Keytruda and think about how a diagnostic can help it to operate, Keytruda is an anti-PD-1 antibody. Now, PD-1 is a receptor on T cells, and when it's activated by a ligand, such as PD-L1, it acts to suppress the activity of the T cell and basically puts the brakes on the immune system. Now, the importance of PD-L1 in the tumor setting is that tumors actually use PD-L1 to escape being recognized by the immune system. So you can imagine if you're going to use an anti-PD-1 antibody to try and take the brakes off of the immune system, you might want to know whether or not the tumor is using PD-L1 to suppress the immune system in the first place. And this is exactly what Merck did. So they entered into their clinical programs examining the expression levels of PD-L1 in the tumors, and they found that if they were above a certain cutoff point, that those patients had the best response to Keytruda. So the paradigm here would be, without a diagnostic test, you treat everybody and you have a relatively low cost effectiveness. With a diagnostic test, specifically for PD-L1, you treat only the PD-L1 high patients, and you have a relatively high cost effectiveness. You wouldn't want to treat the other patients because they're less likely to have a robust response, and you can give them alternate treatments that might help them more effectively. So PD-1 falls into sort of a more traditional diagnostic area, kind of like HER2 is for Herceptin for all these years. And you can see in this graphic here that it's used, PD-L1 screening is used for most patients with non-small cell lung cancer, and a little bit less for melanoma, and then working way all the way down here to pancreatic cancer, where it's only used about 1/5 of the time. But there are other unexpectedly effective diagnostics that can use next generation sequencing that can look at things such as microsatellite instability or defects in mismatch repair that can also identify patients that will respond to Keytruda. So not necessarily the logical approach of looking at the ligand for the receptor, but looking at other things that, interestingly enough, do predict response. So in this paradigm, this top ends up being the same. No diagnostic test means you treat everybody and you have low cost effectiveness. In this next generation sequencing situation, those with defects in mismatch repair or microsatellite instability high patients are treated, and once again, we achieve a high cost effectiveness. It's interesting to note that today there are about 200 clinical trials in oncology looking at microsatellite instability in mismatch repair. And basically all of the PD-1 and PD-L1 antibodies are in one trial or another. So in addition to the fact that the costs of healthcare are rising, we're seeing advancement of precision medicine that's helping to bring the price of treatments down, creating a balance between the two. Perhaps not a perfect balance. The healthcare costs are still rising, but with the greater and greater specificity that we can generate today and also moving forward, we may be able to get more control over the costs and create more equity within the system. So let's switch gears a little bit and look at digital and how it's empowering patients. Now, in the traditional model of years ago, the physicians were the ones that had the power around the health of the patient. We know today that the payers are playing an increasingly great role in assessing the value of each medicine in comparison to its costs. But that's not the story that I want to talk about here. I want to talk about how digital therapeutics can help patients. Digital therapeutics and digital technologies can help patients to create better, healthy lives, and also even to treat some of their diseases. So patient empowerment, it's not purely digital. If you think about a company like 23andMe that's doing genetic test services, maybe there's a semi-digital component to it, but 23andMe and other companies that provide risk factors related to people's genetic makeup are one part of the equation. But there are technologies such as wearable devices that can help to measure things such as heart rate. There are mobile apps such as Noom that help to change the psychology of people as they approach food. And then there are smart health communities where people can gather together and get and give advice and share ideas and ask questions and really discuss their disease state and come to a closer relationship with others that are going through the same thing. But there are also a goodly number of wearables that should really be noted. If you look at TempTrack, which is from a company called BlueSpark, this is a Bluetooth-enabled temperature probe that you put onto a patient in the form of a patch. And this enables hospitals to measure the patient temperatures ongoing and detect temperature spikes much more rapidly than through the more normal routine of coming in and measuring the temperature via a nurse or some other healthcare provider. You have La Roche-Posay, which has come out with a device. It's a wearable device that measures UV exposure and helps the people that use the device to make better decisions on how to protect their skin with a variety of different skincare treatments. Apple, as referenced on the prior slide, does measure people's pulse rates, but they also have developed an ECG app that is FDA approved for detecting irregular heart activity. And this is available in the Apple Watch series from 4 onwards. And then finally, a really interesting arrangement between a company called Dexcom, that is a glucose sensing company, and Tandem, which makes insulin pumps. Now the companies got together and they created a closed loop system where the glucose monitor spoke directly to the insulin pump. And the arrangement there was that if the glucose levels went up, the insulin pump would automatically inject more insulin into the patient. What they found is that in comparison to a situation where a human, the patient themselves, would read the readings on the glucose and then they would make the adjustments on the insulin pump, that they had better effectiveness in controlling glycemic range. So this is now FDA approved, and there are other companies that are actually moving into the space. And finally, EndeavorX, this June, was the first ever video game approved by the FDA as a mental health treatment for children aged 8 to 12 with ADHD. So this is actually a therapeutic that has no physical embodiment other than the computer that the program is run on. So you don't go out to your local Walgreens or CVS to pick up a prescription. You file the prescription and you download the video game and you're set. So a real interesting twist in digital therapeutics, and I suspect if you think about things that relate to the brain, that there will probably be more digital therapeutics that could help with things such as depression and other diseases. So what we're seeing is the rise of empowered patients and digital health coming into the forefront as an important megatrend. Now we'll go a little bit further into disruption of the status quo. Now you would argue perhaps that these digital therapeutics are disruptions, but there are other types of disruptions to be considered as well. The first of these that I think many of us are aware of is this joint venture that was formed between Amazon, JP Morgan Chase, and Berkshire Hathaway. Now this joint venture has been called Haven, and the idea is that it will address the increase in costs of healthcare delivery. So it's a nonprofit organization focused on families, not on shareholders, and because it's free for profit making and constraints, it's able to deliver simplified, high quality, and transparent healthcare at a reasonable cost. Now, what Haven is doing for its 1.45 million employees that will eventually be covered is looking at the division of the healthcare dollar. So there's some administrative costs that can probably be driven down. There's hospital, home, and other personal care. I don't know how much this could be affected by Haven, but there are physician and clinical services and prescription drugs. And you could think if you're bargaining for 1.45 million people, you might be able to get a better deal on prescription prices and lower the copays. But we'll return once again to digital, but this is not digital for the patient specifically, but digital and the way that it's infiltrated throughout all of healthcare. So you have robotics, you have different sensors, you have artificial intelligence, you have a variety of different systems here. And these are all interplaying within the healthcare environment. They're used for diagnosis and treatment, speed and accuracy, personalization of medicine, self-service, training, a whole gamut of ways that they can be leveraged. And in this regard, they're not seen as a replacement for the healthcare provider, but something that supports or augments their efficiency. By having these systems do some of the work on behalf of the physicians and nurses and healthcare providers, this allows them to focus a little bit more on valuable patient-facing activities. One of the things that really is important within the system is the leveraging of blockchain. Blockchain is there to protect the system in a variety of different ways. Now, I know if you think of blockchain, you probably think of Bitcoin, but I'd like you to just open your mind a little bit and think of how it might be used in other ways. So blockchain systems provide an immutable, decentralized record of data transactions between multiple different parties. So you see Walmart using it for supply chain management, you see Pfizer and Roche using it for fraud prevention, and you see MetLife using it for smart payments. And if you think about fraud prevention for the pharmaceutical industry, it looks a little something like this. So you have the manufacturer manufacture the drug, create a hash, and add it into the blockchain. The medicine is transferred over to the wholesaler, who verifies the origin of the product through the blockchain and then edits the blockchain to add this transaction. This is repeated as the medicine moves to the pharmacist, and once again as the pharmacist moves the medicine to the patient. So the patient can look back through the entire blockchain and see the provenance of the medicine that they're receiving and recognize that it is actually from the manufacturer who's supposed to be authorized to produce it. The importance of this is that if you look in developing countries, but even in developed countries, a large percentage of drugs that are sold are actually counterfeit. And the global counterfeit market is worth about $200 billion annually. The problem with counterfeits is not just that it could be a medicine not manufactured by the right originator, but many counterfeits don't even have medicine in them at all. And so this is a risk for patient health. If you think that you're taking the right medicine and it's got no active pharmaceutical ingredient, then you're putting yourself at risk and at the profit of those that are defrauding the system. So we have arrival of new forces in healthcare. We've got Amazon, we've got Google, we've got IBM, we've got startup, we've got Haven, different forces, ones that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of being within the system, but they're there now, and I think that they'll play an important role in the future. Now we're going to finish this talk with a discussion of something a little bit perhaps unexpected. And I'm going to go back to science, and I'm going to talk to you about the microbiome. So a person, on average, has about 3 × 10⁻13 cells. But if you look at the microbiome, the composition of bacteria, viruses, and fungi, you can see that people are actually superorganisms. And if you count it by units, how many bacteria, how many viruses, people are actually about 90% microbiome, I guess maybe 11% human cells. Now this is not by weight, this is by unit count. But our bodies, count by count for each unit, are predominantly actually made of microbiome. Now this plays a role in a number of different diseases, and I think it would be no surprise to you that infections is one of them. But it's also notable that the microbiome seems to play a role in GI diseases, mental health, autoimmune diseases, and cancer. And cancer is the one that I'd like to talk to you about next. Now this is a study that was published in Science in 2018, and it involves melanoma patients being treated with an anti-PD-1 antibody. What they did was an initial microbiome sampling of each patient, a tumor biopsy, and then they initiated therapy. And you can see down here that the therapy went out to anywhere between about 500 and 600 days. There was a clinical assessment and imaging later on in the study, and then a repeat microbiome sampling. And what the authors did is they compared progression-free survival in these various graphics according to microbiome diversity. So those with high fecal microbiome diversity performed better than those with low or intermediate microbiome diversity. And this was not just any microbiome. It wasn't upper GI microbiome. It was specifically fecal microbiome that was found to correlate with this. Now, the reason I think that this is interesting is because this study was published in 2018, and you'll note that there was a steady rise in the number of trials that went on up to 2018, and then it jumped. So in 2019, there was almost doubling in the number of studies that were studying the microbiome. And I think it's probably going to level off this year. We're up to 43 so far. I wouldn't be surprised if it came in at around the same level, around 60 or so by the end of the year. So a number of oncology trials examining the microbiome, and I'll be interested to see if these type of results can be replicated, and if one can come up with some way of actually altering the microbiome to create a situation where somebody has a better response to an anti-PD-1 or other oncological therapy. So if you're looking into the microbiome, it's good that you look at a goodly number of reviews and other individual studies. And I found something in Nature Outlook that directed me to a company called Biomics. Now, Biomics is a company that is specifically targeting the microbiome. And the way that they're doing it is they're actually generating bacteriophage that can be delivered into the bacteria that are associated with a variety of different diseases. And they have different payloads that they put into them. I want to focus here on colorectal cancer. So what the company has found is that Fusobacterium nucleatum is found in elevated levels in tumor tissue for the colorectal cancer tumor patients. So if a patient has colorectal cancer, there are more Fusobacterium nucleatum in the tumor's tissue than there is in the adjacent normal tissue. So what they do is they do a variety of different studies to identify bacteriophage that target Fusobacterium nucleatum. And here you can see that they have both the Fusobacterium nucleatum and the phage, and that they can actually have lysogenesis of the bacterium in response to the phage. So they don't just want phage that are lysogenic, they also want phage that are lytic. And the reason is because they want to put in a payload, have the bacteriophage deliver the payload into the bacterium produces a protein or protein fragment, and then it lyses and then delivers that payload into the environment. In this case, it would be the tumor environment. So they're putting in immunostimulatory payloads, immunogenic cell death payloads, prodrug converting enzymes, and angiogenesis inhibition agents as well. And the way that the model goes is this. So you have a cold tumor that's not going to be responsive to a checkpoint inhibitor. You target the Fusobacterium nucleatum in the tumor, in this case the colorectal tumor. You deliver the payload. The cold tumor then becomes a hot tumor because you've made the tumor immunologically recognizable by the human being. And then you give them the immune checkpoint inhibitor or activator, and you now have an effect on the tumor. This is the model. We don't yet know whether or not this is going to work, but it's something really interesting and something I think that you should know about and you should look into on occasion to see how this company progresses moving forward. So I'll finish up with a summary of the megatrends that we've seen that will affect us over the next 10 years. So we do see the cost of healthcare rising. This is because patients are being treated with being pre-treated with vaccines or treated with anti-infectious disease agents that are causing them to live longer lives, generate chronic conditions that ultimately cause their death. In response to the rising costs in healthcare that come from this type of situation, we have the advancement of precision medicine that helps to better identify the right patients that are going to respond to the right medicines, take inefficiency out of the system, and lower costs. We do see the rise of empowered agents and digital health, which is going to be an important thing, I think, moving forward for how patients understand their health, how patients treat their diseases, and a very interesting, especially I think around neuroscience and neurological disorders that might be affected by some sort of a behavioral interaction through a digital agent. We do have a variety of different new players that are coming forward in healthcare. We talked a little bit about Haven, which is the joint venture between Amazon and JP Morgan Chase and Berkshire Hathaway. But there are other traditional tech players, I think, that you'll see coming further and further and deeper into healthcare and having a greater and greater impact. And then finally, we have the emergence of the microbiome as a new frontier in healthcare. It's a pretty exciting area. I hope that you hadn't heard of it before I gave this talk today. I think it's a promising area, but we really have to wait and see how the microbiome is being leveraged to treat diseases. So with that, I'll thank you very much, and I'll look forward to talking to you in the Q&A.